As human beings, one of the things that is necessary for a flourishing life is the reality of silence. We notice in life many of the greatest spectacles that happen within the reality of the world happen in silence. One author mentions the reality that the grass grows in silence, the trees grow in silence, the stars display their beauty in silence. Even the sun warms us with its rays. And the reality of silence reveals to us that a lot of beautiful things happen in the silence that sometimes we don't notice because we're always immersed in the reality of noise. The more we practice silence in our lives, the more we are able to hear, love, and understand people around us. Not only is it important to hear God, but it's also important to hear our neighbor. Today, there's a lot of talk about listening to someone's experience and their story in order to try to understand them and see where they're coming from, not having some cold, automatic response or already thinking what you're going to say before you even listen to them in a real way. And this involves a capacity for us, in one sense, to be silent. There's a great book out by Cardinal Robert Sarah, and he mentions this reality within his book, and it's called The Power of Silence Against the Dictatorship of Noise. And he talks about the fact that a lot of people always need background music for this or that, or they're always watching this show or that show, or they always need some kind of noise in their life. And in one sense, it sickens the person, and they're unable to hear the voice of God calling them in this direction or that direction toward a virtuous and holy life. In the silence, also, we see ourselves more clearly, and even our sins. Another reason people usually favor noise, they refuse to confront themselves. For I said this many times, but we're always called to the most holy Mass by God. It's always a response to a person in the silence. This is why, if we simply go out of obedience to the law, we're deaf to the living God who calls. And in one sense, we're a slave to the letter of the law, and not moved by grace and freedom to love God above all things. For every vocation begins with this attentiveness to the voice of God who speaks to us through his word, not to some empty audience. And there is a certain stillness or silence within the person's heart that allows God to speak to them directly in the midst of the crowd of believers. For it is not the assembly of believers that creates a priest, a nun, or a monk, or even holy couples in matrimony. But it's always the living God who calls each person to their vocation in the midst of us, and this is what causes the wonder about it all. The Cardinal mentions, for man can encounter God in truth only in silence and solitude, both interior and exterior. In our lives, we need to spend time alone with God. We notice in today's gospel, Jesus went up the mountain alone. For the living God holds us in existence, and in that holding is a loving and merciful presence, a God who has compassion for us in our weakness and gently guides us in a kind of whisper toward the road we must travel for the salvation of our souls. God does not force us, but he persuades the soul to go in the right direction. Or if we've lost our way or have gone astray, the Spirit of God gently brings us back to the path of life in order that we encounter the medicine of mercy and the sacrament of confession. And all of these moments happen in the silence of our lives, where in the sanctuary of our conscience we encounter God, where in one sense the living God allures us and leads us into the desert of silence to speak to our heart directly, to reveal to us he is present. Therefore, it is important for us in our lives to carve out time for silence, not necessarily to say this prayer or that prayer to God, but just silence where we recognize He is there and we are there. This will help us to not doubt like Peter, but know in a real way, to learn in our heart and mind that God is present, not at a distance, but close. In the midst of a beautiful day or even a ferocious storm, God is there.